let 'em pick guitars and drive. Make 'em be doctors and lawyers and so. Mama, don't let your babies grow up to be cowards. They'll never stay home in their home, even for someone they love. Cowboys ain't easy to love, and they're hard to hold. And they'd rather give you a song than diamonds. Lone Star bell buckles and old faded Levi's. Each night begins a new day. And if you don't understand him, and he don't die young, you'll probably just ride. Mama, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys. Don't let 'em pick guitars and drive. Make 'em be doctors and lawyers. Mama, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys. They'll never stay home in their home, even someone they love. Cowboys like smoky old roads and clear mountain mornings. And warm homes, children and girls. And them that don't know him won't like him, and them that do sometimes won't know how to. He ain't wrong, pride won't let him do things to make you think he's right.
Because each portrait has a complete different set of hues and values, a new mixture for the palette is done with each painting. And usually there are 3 to 5 base colors ranging from the highlight on through to the darkest cast or core shadows. And then there are some reds and blues and greens which are added to the palette and mixed as the painting process is done. The album cover or the photograph is covered with an acetate, and the color is mixed and touched right to the photograph so that the color is as exact as you can get it, with highlight, mid-value, and shadow. The agency sends in the original design for the billboard, and it is then taken up to the darkroom where the patterns are made. The machine used for that is an electrical pencil, which burns holes through the paper, allowing the image to be transferred through. The pattern is taken down to the billboard, and 2 more of the painters will take the pattern and roll it out across the billboard and pounce the image through the holes which were perforated in the darkroom. The image is then redrawn with felt tip pens and prepared then for the final painting process. The reason felt tips are used is to allow that ink to penetrate through the painted surface and allows the image to be seen right up through the paint until the final process is complete. And after 2 or 3 days in the sun, the felt tip ink fades away and is non-existent. The brushes that we use are bristle brushes, very similar to the type that are used by easel painters. The only difference being that they're larger. The sizes range from 1.5 inches on up to 4 inches. The pictorial work is done with oil paint, just as the kind of paint that easel painters use. It comes in larger containers. You buy it by the quart and by the gallon, but it's the same consistency that is used by easel painters. On the portrait itself, I would estimate approximately 2 quarts of paint are used. And on the rest of the billboard, which encompasses the lettering, the background, another 1.5 gallons of paint is used. Normally, the painting process proceeds with blocking in of the big shapes and areas of color. Initially, it's almost a posterized look, and then later on I come back and pull the values and the colors together. Because Las Vegas is unique, and because we have show people coming in and out so frequently, you have 8 hours as an average time to complete the total portrait. Start with darks and work the outlines and redraw some of the main lines around the eyes, the eyebrows, the nostrils, and then work into lighter values and the mid values. When you're looking at an eye that's the size of your torso, and make that eye fit the other eye, and relate that to the nose and the teeth and the mouth and the lips, and not let value differences push and pull the shapes back and forth. The scale is a problem. It's a problem to deal with. I believe that a painter that can paint well on a small scale, with just a little bit of practice, does have an intuitive sense about enlarging. The thing that you must constantly remind yourself when painting a billboard is that it's going to be viewed from a car normally going about 55 miles an hour down the highway, anywhere from 1 to 2, 3 blocks away. And so 2 or 3 things must be considered. First of all, there are areas that you don't take much time with, such as clothing and hair and things like that that can be slightly slurred over. Much of what you leave out is as important as what you put in. I think the ability to draw is really important, because many of the things that we do, many of the photographs that we must paint from, the patterns are not clear, and therefore you must restructure and redraw a hand or a face. And when you have to do that, people that cannot draw well, it's very evident that that does not come off well. If there is a problem that keeps coming back, it's one in which the photograph is flat. The best photographs for pictorial, those in which a good degree of contrast is evident. And occasionally I will try and exaggerate the contrast, play up the highlights and play down the darks. There's a lot of people that can paint bottles and buildings and fruit and those kinds of things, but when it comes to portraits, there are really very few. I would say that probably the most important features when doing a portrait are the eyes. When painting a billboard portrait, it's like a small easel-type painting. The focus is on the eyes and the mouth and the nose, specifically the eyes. The edge quality is very, very important, I think, because you step down and step back, and an edge that you think is soft enough hardens right up. The edge quality and the color purity are the 2 most important things. The town of Las Vegas intrigued me because of its plastic, fast-paced quality, and I look at the town really as kind of one big pop art exhibit. And the billboards definitely play part in that. I think the billboard attitude that prevails in this town is a very important part of what goes on here. For the past 15 years, I have been involved in many aspects of creative activity, and I have found that this past year, my involvement with billboard art has been somewhat fascinating. I believe primarily due to the fact that I came to Las Vegas with the idea that the town seemed to be on the brink of a possible birth for new and exciting ways of working with art. While I do not consider myself a pop artist in any way, I believe that the involvement with the activity created by that attitude was something that I kind of wanted to experience. I found that I was painting about women who dance in Las Vegas. The painting is titled Boom, Boom, Ba-Boom, Boom, Ba-Boom, Boom, Ba-Boom, Ba-Boom, Ba-Boom. In fact, it's a whole paragraph of boom, boom, ba-booms. And the painting is this reverse sort of rhythmical image. The women have no heads and they have nothing below their knees. They're not even really women. They're sort of hung there almost like slabs of meat in a butcher's locker. And I found that I was painting that because I didn't like what I saw women doing in Las Vegas. In fact, I remember the night that the whole thing sort of hit me. I was with my wife and we saw this thing happen, and within the next 2 or 3 weeks this painting came out of that. And I realized sometime later that's what I was painting about. My best work, the work that I keep, the work that I end up finishing, comes out of that subconscious content that I like to let take over when I'm working. After having spent now 13 months working on billboards, I have found that it's very, very difficult to go back into my studio and paint. It's not so difficult to work in another area such as sculpture or designing for magazine or playground structures or that sort of thing. But it's very difficult to go back into the studio with painting. My paintings are totally different in approach, where I use the airbrush and acrylics as opposed to oil and fluidity here and that sort of thing. I have not used oil in an easel painting for a number of years. Acrylics just seem to provide that lean quality that I'm after. I began to use airbrush simply because I liked the very, very lean quality that it gave me. I used to paint with a lot of paint, and I found myself using less and less pigment. And the airbrush lays on a very thin layer. It allows me to model without using a lot of pigment, and therefore I prefer that. I think that possibly the linear quality that I use in my paintings and the luminosity or the neon quality that the airbrush gives are kind of an outgrowth of my Las Vegas experience, very definitely. Selling a painting has never bothered me. I'd like to sell them all for $500,000 apiece. I think we all would like to do that. They don't go like pancakes, that's all, or hamburgers. They sell at high prices and they sell rather slowly. And I'm very happy with it just that way. I think partly the reason that I do billboards is so that I do not have to paint my serious work to sell it. For a number of years, I've worked as a university professor, and I was really a dyed-in-the-wool fine artist. I didn't really feel like there was any room for commercial art in my life, and I think partly my reason for getting away from that environment was to kind of get back with the working men and see what it felt like to punch a time clock and see if a fine artist could really move across the line into commercial art and back again. And I feel that really this can be done without any problem whatsoever. When I finish a series, it sort of lets me know when I'm through with it, and I feel like maybe I've accomplished some of the things that I wanted to do with it. I don't really ever say, I'm going to do this now. I may think, for example, though, that I'm going to do a series of pieces relating to the rodeo. You know, maybe I'm going to go to the rodeo, but I won't look at the things that most people see at a rodeo. I will look at things maybe that other people seem to miss. And I will look and just watch and observe, and maybe in a month's time, go in and let the subconscious begin to work. The images that left impressions on me will begin to come out. As a student, I did many things. I even worked for a while in a women's dress shop, decorating the window out front. And I believe that everything that a student can do will feed back to his art. And eventually he will end up doing the thing which suits him best. Nearly all my paintings and sculptures start first with drawings from nature or from a model or from something. I think also that it's very important to go back and discipline yourself to draw from the live model and to continually bring your eye-hand coordination into focus. It's easy sometimes for a painter, if he gets in a particular vein, like painting stripes or squares, to paint stripes and squares for 20 years. And I feel that the discipline of going back and drawing and mixing colors the way you want to match colors the way you need to, is a good part of the learning process in art. I have found that over the past several years that the more I paint, the larger I seem to want to paint. And I think possibly dealing with billboards has something to do with that, but I just find it more and more difficult to go down to a smaller size. The idea of doing an exhibit on billboards, doing my paintings 14 by 48 feet is an exciting thought. I'll be doing a mural on the Hilton Hotel that will be 30 feet by 130 feet. That concept is challenging and exciting. The fact that you can work that scale is kind of a mind blower. My attitude is not to limit myself to anything. In fact, I've wondered at times what we will look at as today's art, 1,000 years from now. Perhaps archaeologists will dig up billboards and say that's what art really was in the 1980s. In fact, with that thought in mind, I've considered the possibility of doing a one-man show on billboards here in Las Vegas, with the idea that more people would see my 8 billboards than would see them in a gallery maybe in a year's time. I did a double image painting called Something to Do with the Big Rock Candy Mountain. And that painting dealt with the female image, which I used and reversed. I started putting sweet colors into it. Part of it, I threw the paint down, flipped it down on the floor, onto the canvas. And it took on kind of a runway quality. And this title kept coming back to my mind, Something to Do with Big Rock Candy Mountain. And I finished it, titled that, and not until maybe 2 or 3 months later did I realize that subconsciously I was painting about a person that we knew called Candy, who was an airline stewardess. And she came to school to do the whole mountain trip. She bought hiking boots and Levi's and the whole thing. She was there about 6 months, and she left to go back to the big city. And I think the runway, the Candy Mountain, the whole thing was about that person. And that's kind of the way most of my paintings go. The monument to the Four Corner area was just 4 women that were done as a design, and the title just came really after the painting was completed. I lived within 50 miles of the Four Corner area. I find that when I paint, my subconscious takes over in the wee hours of the morning when I'm working in the studio. And I think a subconscious content came into that piece. When I paint or sculpt, I find that by working in a series, I get closer to what I'm trying to achieve than if I just do one painting. And I found that in the last couple of series of paintings, my paintings began to get sculptural. The surfaces seemed to take on a sculptural feeling to them. And the sculptures were simply an outgrowth of that. I'm really not sure how long I'll continue doing billboard art. I do know that I will continue with my sculptural images, which deal with the human form in a surrealistic way. I'm dealing with the imagined image as it relates and blends with the real image. In the sculptural images and in some of the new painting images that I'm working with, I'm dealing with a concept that allows realism to come and go. The images begin to take on the feeling of a real human form, and then they go into an imagined form. I don't like to call them surrealistic pieces, but I think if you had to label them, that would be a direction that they begin to take. The pieces of sculpture are built from plywood. When I started those pieces, I spent 2 or 3 days with a model. And after working with the model, I came up with about 27, 28 drawings. And I pinned the drawings up in my studio and looked at them for a couple of weeks and decided that they should be sculptural. At that point, I had to decide what would be the best medium to use to turn those pieces into sculptures, and I decided to use plywood. And the plywood is cut with a jigsaw, laminated together, and the forms are built into the third dimension that way. Occasionally, I've experimented with sandblasting just to see what would happen to the surface, but wasn't real pleased with that, and I find myself going to the smoother surface. Within the wood pieces of sculpture, there was a thing that I was working with, the sensuous kind of softness that the wood presents, as opposed to the cold flatness of the steel, the chrome-plated steel, and the brushed aluminum. And I was working with that contrast in some of those pieces. I felt that it gave maybe more evidence of that thing that I was dealing with the softness of the reality of the human form, as it is juxtaposed with the more severe, flat, mechanical shapes. As the pieces of sculpture near completion, I look at the grain, and if the wood grain does not seem to fight the overall form, the overall shapes, I leave it. If the wood grain seems to conflict with what I want to do with the big shapes, I then paint it out with automotive primer, and about 5 coats, sanded, and then I use automotive paint to get the finished smoothness. When I begin to build a piece of sculpture, I find that I'm most comfortable building it life-size or the size of another human being. The reason I color the pieces with automotive primer and automotive paint is to get them as near metal looking as possible. That gets me closer to what the bronze piece would be. The pieces I have cast in bronze, I take to the Wasatch Bronze Works in Utah. The workmen there take the piece and deal with the mechanics of the casting process. The bronze allows the sculptor to deal in mediums that would otherwise be fragile. I enjoy the bronze pieces because they have a reflective metallic quality that is not visible, of course, in the wood. After the first piece has been cast and patinaed, it's cataloged, and an addition of bronze pieces to follow that will be made to look exactly like the original or the first piece. It's every sculptor's desire, I believe, to work monumental in scale. I'm not sure if that's an outgrowth in my case of working on large-scale billboards or murals, but it's something that I desire very much to do. As you walk back to a piece that you haven't seen for maybe a year or two, and it's been out of doors in the weather, it's like seeing an old friend who has aged slightly. And you remember that piece as it came out of the foundry and what it was then and what it is now, and usually it's better than when you last saw it. In the creative process, you have the awareness, the focus, the working process, and the art product. The thing that keeps me coming back into the studio time after time is not the finished product, but the process, the idea, the building of content. The way I see it, to stop exploring would be to stop growing in art, and that could never be my way of doing things. So I'm going to continue to work. I've really enjoyed all of it anyway. It's been, it's great, you know, it's an experience. In fact, I think I'm going to change my name to William Wild Bill Billy Board, the billboard artist. Now, I've really got to get back to work, guys. lot of fun.